This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's May 6th, 2025. 90 years ago today, an American president signed an executive order that had a profound impact on the everyday lives of people throughout Middle Tennessee. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. So far, this second Donald Trump presidency has been marked by a profusion of executive orders, instructions to federal agencies that come directly from the White House that have the force of law unless Congress or the Supreme Court takes some additional superseding action. Those kinds of orders have been part of America's civic life for most of the time that we've been a nation, but they really took a turn a little less than a century ago when the Supreme Court began taking a more laissez-faire approach with a president who may have been even more enamored of the executive order than our current one is. I'm talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. As president, he issued nearly 4,000 executive orders. That's how he enacted much of the economic recovery effort we know as the New Deal. And one of the really big pieces of that was created by the stroke of a pen on this day in 1935. Now, the Works Progress Administration didn't come completely out of the blue, and it didn't come about completely without congressional action. About a month before the order was issued, the House and Senate agreed to an Emergency Relief Appropriations Act that gave the president funding to take radical action and employ masses of people who were struggling to make ends meet as the Great Depression dragged on. And it was far from the first big swing. The Tennessee Valley Authority had already been established with the goal of electrifying the economically distressed areas of Tennessee and neighboring states. The Securities and Exchange Commission had been established to help head off future stock market disasters. There have been major efforts to stabilize agricultural prices and production. There were long-term federal infrastructure projects underway, and the Federal Housing Administration had begun working to make sure there were affordable paths to permanent housing. But the WPA became one of the biggest programs of them all, and its scope was laid out in that executive order signed on this day. It was supposed to get people off the welfare rolls by giving them work to do for the common good. And it needed to do that for, and this is a quote, the maximum number of persons in the shortest time possible. Here in Tennessee, the FDR administration put a former World War I artillery commander named Harry Berry in charge of the WPA Nashville office, and he set about modernizing the state in some really key ways. WPA workers did a lot of road building and improvement. 60% of their effort in Tennessee was spent on roadways, along with installing sewers, building dams, constructing bridges, viaducts, overpasses. In Nashville, WPA workers restored Fort Negley, refurbished schools, and improved a number of city parks, including Centennial and Warner Parks. They worked at the Hermitage. They built a new headquarters for the Tennessee Highway Department and a garage for the city to maintain vehicles used by the local government. Perhaps most significantly to us now, they built the Nashville Airport. That B in BNA stands for Berry, as in that commander running the WPA in this state. And that's just Nashville. The Memphis Zoo was built by the WPA. School lunch programs were established and staffed across the state by the agency. New post offices were constructed in small towns across Tennessee. And when the Mississippi River flooded in 1937, WPA workers from our part of Tennessee rushed to the Memphis area to staff relief centers for the 50,000 people who were forced to evacuate. These days, that's the kind of stuff we mostly remember about the WPA. The way that the federal government invested in communities and made improvements that paid off for generations. The way that people were able to work and earn paychecks to feed and house their families. The way that struggling areas were given a hand to fully enter the 20th century, for better or worse. But of course, there were plenty of criticisms at the time. It was called inefficient, although some of that was by design. The goal was to employ people. Doing good things in the process was, to some extent, just a side effect. It was never meant to be about completing projects under budget with a streamlined workforce. And people weren't always convinced that the projects taken on by the WPA were worthwhile. The word boondoggle came into use at that time to describe government building efforts that some people found irrational, unnecessary, or just plain stupid. And the politics of it all could be complicated. Here in Tennessee, the WPA turned out to be a powerful tool for political boss Edward Crump and a U.S. Senator named Kenneth McKellar, who had once been Crump's literal errand boy, although by this point the two were somewhat at odds with each other. Both had supported FDR in the 1932 election, and so they had the ear of his officials. They were pretty good at maneuvering so the people they liked got key roles in administering WPA projects. And by 1938, the height of WPA activity, things reached a fever pitch with a federal lawsuit alleging Works Progress Administration employees of campaigning for candidates with the Crump seal of approval. And in fact, just like we enjoy the work of the WPA when we visit parks or fly out of this city, the nation as a whole feels the ripple effects of that chapter of Tennessee's political gamesmanship. That lawsuit, and similar ones in a couple of other states, led directly to passage of the Hatch Act, which is the federal law that limits the political actions of federal employees and keeps, or at least seeks to keep, partisan politics out of the day-to-day running of federal agencies. In just a few minutes, how one mixed status family in Tennessee took a big chance. That's coming up after the newscast.
On This is Nashville, we're taking a journey into the identity of this place we call home. The old and the new, the glitzy and the gritty, the monumental and the human. What makes Nashville tick? What makes it unique? And where are we headed as a city? We're going deeper on the day's news, bringing you dynamic conversations and taking you with us out into the community. Join us weekdays at noon. This is Nashville.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Governor Bill Lee has vetoed a bill for the first time in his 6-year career as Tennessee's top official. To this point, bills that made it to the governor's desk have all become law. Lee's either signed the legislation or allowed it to go into effect without his signature. Lee made an exception for a measure that would have given the state more power to reject parole requests. Under current law, the Board of Parole must consider multiple factors when deciding to grant parole, like the completion of in-prison education programs. The bill would have allowed the board to reject petitions solely on the severity of the crime and expand the number of crimes for which the board can revoke parole or probation. In a letter to lawmakers yesterday, Lee argued that the legislation contradicts a bipartisan law passed in 2021 that established incentives for reentry education programs. In a statement, Lee points out that Tennessee has since achieved the lowest recidivism rate in state history, saying that means, quote, fewer crimes and fewer victims. Lawmakers could override Lee's veto, a lever the legislature's not had to pull since Lee took office in 2019. The legislation passed the Republican supermajority along party lines. An ICE raid on Nashville's immigrant corridor has increased tension between city and state officials. WPLN's Miriam reports that Mayor Freddie O'Connell has decried the raids, but there isn't much he can do in his official capacity to stop them in the future because of legislation passed this year.
As part of the omnibus immigration law, any local official who votes in favor of sanctuary policies could be removed from office and charged with a felony. That's on top of the fact that sanctuary policies were already banned by state law. Mayor O'Connell says that he's spoken with Governor Bill Lee about his concerns.
I flagged that this seems like a moment of significant tension increase between local and state.
A part of the state law, which takes effect in July, will give state entities involved in immigration enforcement the ability to shield records from the public. O'Connell says it's already hard to demand transparency from ICE officials, citing anecdotal reports that its Nashville facility is keeping people in inhumane conditions.
It is not a local operation, and it's a very difficult place for us to be able to make any guarantees about the conditions inside.
O'Connell also announced a new fund that will go towards helping the families of those detained in the raid. In partnership with the Community Foundation, the Belonging Fund will go towards emergency assistance for childcare, housing instability, or transportation. Mariana Baca-Yao, WPLN News.
There's good news for 2 Tennessee school districts. Math scores at middle schools in Weakley and Putnam counties improved, while other states are still trying to rebound from the pandemic. According to Chalkbeat Tennessee, the Weekly and Putnam school districts credit several strategies for the math improvements, such as having instructional coaches, increasing math class time, and recognizing individual student needs and applying successful learning styles. National average math scores for 8th graders were lower in 2024 than they were in 2019, but Tennessee was one of 5 states where scores increased. Research shows that high achievement in middle school leads to higher income, interest in furthering education, and reducing teen pregnancy and incarceration. Weekly School District also used federal COVID relief funds to hire additional staff. The county is poorer than most of the country, with most families making less than $50,000. And there's a worry that possible federal funding cuts to their budget could result in losing 90 positions. Advocates for victims of domestic violence scored a win last week during the state of Metro. The mayor put money in his budget to broaden access to people's criminal histories. WPLN's Paige Flager says it's a reform that advocates have been pushing for to keep victims safe.
The problem is this. Let's say someone is charged with a crime and a judge is trying to decide how high to set bond. They look at a variety of factors, including someone's criminal history. But sometimes people in the justice system in Nashville only have access to previous charges that happened within the county. Someone could have a laundry list of charges in a different county or another state, and officials here wouldn't know. It's an issue that advocates say leaves victims vulnerable. It's also why lawmakers this past session set up a registry of repeat domestic violence offenders. But Mayor O'Connell put some money in his budget so that judges who handle civil and criminal cases can access criminal histories through the National Crime Information Center, helping them make more informed decisions on how to handle a case. Paige Flager, WPLN News.
Tomorrow, Wednesday, May 7th, actors will perform a reading of a WPLN report on rural domestic violence in order to facilitate a conversation about criminal justice. WPLN listeners can watch and take part in the discussion via Zoom. The event is part of Theater of War Productions' long-form journalism series at WNYC. This features acclaimed actors reading in-depth articles to framing discussions around public health issues. Tomorrow night, actors Deborah Winger, Josh Hamilton, Daphne Rubin Vega, and Bill Irwin will perform a story by our criminal justice reporter, Paige Flager. Her story focuses on domestic violence victims who face barriers to justice in rural areas of the state. After the reading, audience members in New York and those on Zoom will be invited to participate in a guided discussion about the story, domestic violence, gun violence, and innovative approaches to prevent both. Registration for the event is free, whether you attend in person or on Zoom. You can find out more on our website, WPLN.org. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Nearly 10 million U.S. citizens are part of a mixed status family. That means they have at least one parent, sibling, or spouse that's undocumented. Many families have just one way to prevent being separated by deportation: for the undocumented person to go to their home country, get a visa from the U.S. Embassy there, and come back legally. WPLN's Chart Aston met a Tennessean whose mother recently attempted this difficult process.
Since Lucy was a kid, her family has been taking her to Las Americas restaurant on Nolensville Pike.
I've been ordering the same thing ever since then. I was shown the pupusas one time, never changed.
Pupusas, corn flour flatbreads filled with meat and cheese. They're a staple food in Central America, including Guatemala, where Lucy's parents are from. Her dad's an asylum seeker who got citizenship, but her mom is undocumented. We're only using her first name to protect her family's identity. The day I met Lucy for lunch at Las Americas was a stressful time for her. Her parents were in Guatemala, trying to get her mom a visa from the U.S. Embassy. Before the trip, Lucy remembers telling her mom,
You can be fearful all you want. That is totally, totally okay. And I'm like, you can be very, very excited as well. And I'm like, you can be anxious. You are totally allowed to have all these feelings.
Lucy's mom had been trying to get legal immigration status for years, not just because of the threat of deportation, but because being undocumented affected her ability to earn money for the family.
She can't have a normal job. She can't have benefits. She has had multiple times where being paid under the table, people will, basically steal her wages because of that.
But the process was really complicated. Basically, spouses of U.S. citizens can get legal status, but if they've lived here without documentation for more than 6 months, they first need a waiver in which the government agrees not to punish them for the time they spent here illegally. Then they need to get a visa at the U.S. Embassy in their home country. Lucy thinks her mom may have finally gotten a waiver because her brother and sister were in the Marines.
And after my brother joined, because he went first, he was able to help expedite her process. And within the last year, certain processes she's never been able to reach before started happening for her.
That's not something that actually happens.
That's Emily Stotts, immigration lawyer and legal director at the nonprofit Tennessee Justice for Our Neighbors. She says there's usually no simple explanation for why you might get a favorable outcome in the immigration system or why others might not.
I frequently tell clients, just because you're X, Y, or Z does not mean that the government's going to speed up your process for you.
Stotts says if they qualify, she'll help clients pursue the path Lucy's mother took. But in her more than a decade as an immigration lawyer, she's only had a handful even try. That's not just because of the slow bureaucracy. Some are not able to afford the trip or the legal fees. The situation in their home country might be unsafe. And if there's something wrong with their paperwork once they're out of the country, they can be barred from re-entering the U.S. for up to 10 years.
Obviously, if you have children here, if you have a life here, if you have a family here, that's kind of the end of the conversation. A lot of people aren't willing to risk that.
For Lucy's family, the risk paid off. A couple weeks after our lunch at Las Americas, Lucy texted me some happy news. Her mom was back in the U.S. legally. Her family was reunited.
Any pestering question that I had in the back of my mind, it all just kind of disappeared. Because basically, as soon as I was able to hold my mom, it felt like I've never been given that strong hug in so long, and I did not want to let go.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration's immigration enforcement has gotten harsher and harder to predict. Here's what Stotts says to her clients who want to travel internationally.
Even though most, a lot of them have either residency or some other permission that says they're allowed to leave and come back, I'm honestly cautioning them against it.
That means even fewer mixed status families will attempt what Lucy's mom did, leaving them vulnerable to separation. Char Aston, WPLN News.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. A little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.